So we're going to talk about the endocrine system now. The endocrine system is another system. It's similar to the nervous system in that it controls other systems and kind of tells other systems what to do. Okay, I think that this is a difficult system to kind of wrap your brain around, but there's not as much information as, say, some of the other systems that we have been talking about. On this kind of picture, it's just kind of for fun. Dopamine and serotonin, these are not hormones, but they are rather part of the nervous system. Dopamine is more of like it's a chemical, a neurotransmitter that's released to kind of that kind of allows people to chase or go after certain things or for drive and motivation. That's kind of what dopamine is. Serotonin, that's kind of like the happy, like you feel good, you just loving life. That's serotonin. Glucagon is what makes you kind of hungry. It's kind of called the hunger hormone. And then testosterone, yeah, you guys probably know what that does. Endocrine system. This is made up of glands that release their products or hormones into the bloodstream. These products deliver messages throughout the body. So how I compare that is it's kind of like Facebook. So if you think about the nervous system, that's another system that controls. It's kind of like a direct text message or a direct phone call. If I need something from somebody like my mom or whatever, I'm going to send her a text message just to her, okay? And it's a direct message, it's pretty quick, and she gets it right away, right? That's what the nervous system is. The endocrine system is a bit more like social media or Facebook, right? Because what happens is that I post something on Facebook, and whoever needs to see it, all right, sees it, and then they can respond. But if you don't need to see it, then that's fine. A great example would be like track, all right? So if I was to post something that, hey, track kids, don't forget to come in tomorrow and take your quiz before you leave for your meet, some of you guys who are in track, you would get that message and you'd be like, okay, I need to get up a little early and make sure I'm here and take the quiz, and then I'm good. Whereas if you're not in track, then it's like that message does not apply to me. All right, so I'm just going to ignore it. All right, that's kind of what the endocrine system does. If you need to respond to it, you will respond. But if you don't need to, that's fine. Okay. Typically, the effects last longer than a nerve impulses. Like pain, like you step on a Lego, it hurts for a little bit, and then it stops. All right, unless there's damage, right? But like people who get into like a car accident, or even if you get scared, right? Your heart rate jumps up and you kind of release some adrenaline. You kind of feel that for hours, and that still effect kind of lingers for a while. And that's kind of what the endocrine system does. Generally, when you think about hormones or steroids, you think about this, but if you think about it, we all have hormones. It's just that these guys, they just take a little extra hormones. They're not supposed to, okay? Hormones, this is a very wide variety of different chemicals that are released in one part of the body that travel through the bloodstream and affect the activities of other cells and other parts of the body, okay? There's many different secretions that your body makes that do different things. You have enzymes that are released into your digestive system. You have tears that have some antimicrobial properties, that have some salts in them that kind of kill bacteria in your sweat, stuff like that. But these ones, hormones particularly, are how cells communicate. It's how your brain, it's one of the ways of how your brain can communicate with your heart. It's how it communicates with your muscles and your legs and all this other stuff, and it travels via the bloodstream, okay? Right here, this is kind of the four major types of hormones, okay? Basically, you have your amine hormones, which is just kind of just an amino group. So for example, this is norepinephrine, okay? It's a very small, just a single modified amino acid, typically, kind of, okay? You don't really have to know this stuff, these four. This is just more for your information. But you can have an amine, a peptide, which is several amino acids linked together. This is oxytocin. This deals with like helping the birthing the baby during the birthing process. Human growth hormone, this helps with growing. This is a protein hormone. All right, so it is a long chain of amino acids, right? Whereas peptide is a short chain. All right, this, you can see it's much bigger, like there would be many amino acids linked together. And then lastly, you have steroid hormones. This is they're derived from something called cholesterol. And they typically have 4 rings in their structure, okay? And then they kind of have some modifications to it, which kind of leads to some variety and different things that they can do. And we'll talk more about steroid hormones today and how they differ from these other hormones. So basically cells, target cells are the cells that have receptors for a particular hormone. So for example, these are receptors. Basically, they are proteins that are within the cell membrane, or sometimes they're within the cell. We'll talk more about that later. But if something binds to it, it's going to activate, have an effect, right? Like if this thing binds, basically these ions, like maybe this is chlorine ions, can go inside the cell. Okay? If this binds here, this might activate another cell. If this thing binds, it will activate these cells. Sometimes these hormones, they're not always hormones. They're sometimes called ligands, but I think some of the pictures might have ligands, but hormones are a type of ligand, but they bind to receptors and they have an effect, okay? Sometimes when you have a hormone and a receptor bind together, you call it the hormone receptor complex. So sometimes it's called a complex. Exocrine glands. Exocrine glands are different than endocrine glands. The big difference between exocrine is that they release into a duct. If you look at a sweat gland, this is where the secretions kind of occur here, and then basically the secretions go up in a duct out into your pores of your skin where you sweat. Okay? If you look at your salivary glands, basically there is a duct, there's your parotid gland, and that goes into your mouth where it's kind of secreted into your mouth, your saliva, which is the secretions that the parotid glands do. Same thing with the pancreas, same thing with your tear glands, that's a duct, that's a tear duct, right? A lot of the digestive stuff we talked about are going to be exocrine glands because they're being secreted into a duct and then into the body. They don't go into the bloodstream typically. Endocrine glands, what they do is they release their secretions or hormones directly into the bloodstream. All right? So this would be your secreting cell. This would be your gland, okay? You have many glands in your body, okay? This is in your brain, your adrenal glands, your liver's technically a gland. So many different glands in your body, and we're going to talk a lot about them. But what happens is that these hormones are released into your interstitial space, and then they go into the bloodstream. Okay? Interstitial space is just a space between other cells. They go into the bloodstream, and then they kind of are dispersed throughout the body. Then, if this hormone finds a receptor, like this would be a target cell, it binds, and then it activates the cell, causing an effect on this cell. So this is how this cell is able to communicate with this cell. So this is how your adrenal glands, which are on top of your kidneys, make you go into fight or flight. It affects your brain. It affects your digestive system. It affects your heart. All right? It affects your muscles. All right? It stimulates them and says it's ready to go. And that's because it's your adrenals. It goes into your bloodstream. And remember, the bloodstream, or the blood, is the highway of the body. It's how things get around. Okay? And it causes the effect. But if a cell doesn't have a receptor for a certain hormone, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't affect that cell in particular. So it has to have this receptor for it to get turned on, if you will. Okay? So some other secretions. Some products are released into the interstitial fluid and broken down very quickly. And they don't typically reach the bloodstream. But they do function kind of the same way as a messenger molecule. All right? Meaning they affect the cell in about the same way. Okay? So you have paracrine. This affects neighboring cells. So if these secretions, they aren't technically hormones. If it's just the cell, maybe a couple cells down, releases something, activates the cell, causes an effect on the cell. Okay. The immune system is going to use a lot of paracrine signaling. Okay. Autocrine. This is self-signaling. To me, it's kind of a little odd that cells do this, but they do. They'll secrete something, and then they have receptors on its own cell, and these secretions will bind to these receptors and cause an effect on the cell. Okay? Endocrine, this is distance signaling, as it kind of says, but this is how a cell all the way in your brain can communicate with a cell all the way down at your feet. Okay? And it does it via the bloodstream. Okay? So these are just two. These are technically, paracrine secretions and autocrine secretions are technically not hormones, but we just kind of talk about them here. All right, here's kind of the weeds part of the presentation. So we're going to compare and contrast steroidal hormones and non-steroidal hormones because how they activate the cell is quite different. Okay? So steroidal hormones are they are nonpolar. All right? What they can do is they can slip past the lipid bilayers. Okay? What a lipid bilayer does is it keeps out things that are large and uncharged. Okay? This right here, this is estrogen, or a pretty common hormone. All right, they're all kind of have the same shape. This is small and uncharged, so it's able to slip past this phospholipid bilayer surrounding the cell. Okay? What it's then going to do, it's going to bind to the cell, to a receptor inside the cell, so a steroid slips behind the phospholipid bilayer to a receptor, forming this complex. Okay? The hormone and receptor complex. Okay? This then affects the DNA. What this does is this increases transcription. So what transcription is it's converting a gene, all right, into an mRNA transcript. You guys remember central dogma of biology, right? Or protein synthesis? DNA to RNA to proteins, okay? So what happens is that this complex activates a region in the DNA which increases transcription. So there's going to be more mRNA transcripts being created. Okay? Goes out into the cytoplasm. All right? And then this mRNA goes on a ribosome, and then there's more proteins that are created. This has an altered cellular function because if there's more proteins, or different proteins, that's going to have an effect on the cell. Okay? So it's going to have altered cell function. Okay? If you think about, let's say, testosterone, okay, if this is a hair cell, all right, generally men have more testosterone, and men also have beards. If this was a hair cell or a hair follicular cell, maybe on your cheek or something like that, if this was testosterone, it would bind to the receptor, bind to the DNA, alter cell function, create some protein, maybe an mRNA transcript for maybe keratin. Keratin is a protein found in hair. So if you create a whole bunch more keratin, you're probably going to have a little bit thicker hair on your cheeks. Women do have hair on their cheeks, but usually it's a lot lighter, right? Whereas men can have thick beards, okay? So by taking testosterone or having testosterone, this causes a change in the cell by giving you hair or thicker hair, okay? Does that make sense? So I have another, also steroids are derived from something called cholesterol. I think I talked about that earlier, but cholesterol is going to be found in like eggs and stuff like that. It used to be said like cholesterol is bad for you, but it's kind of just a marker of something bad. Like your body creates cholesterol. It's not really. I think that science is kind of outdated a little bit from my research, but this is kind of what I've just been saying. If you want to read through this is kind of what I explained on this picture. okay, is right in here. I'm not going to read it all, but I do want you to get this down in your notes because I think writing it down will help, okay? But non-steroidal hormones. All right, so these hormones cannot cross cell membranes. These are large and charged. Some of them are small, but typically they are large and or charged, okay? So they bind to receptors on the cell membrane. So their receptor is not inside the cell. If you look at a steroid hormone, it's inside the cell, okay? They bind to outside the cell because they can't get in, okay? So what happens is that when they bind to this receptor, this complex activates a couple more proteins, and ATP comes in, our boy ATP, battery of the cell, and this is converted to something called CAMP, okay? And this is a secondary messenger, and this causes effects on other cells, and it does this through kinases and phosphorylation. So what phosphorylation is that if you look okay, this is cyclic AMP, okay? This is the cyclic AMP stands for adenosine monophosphate because there's only one phosphate group, okay? Triphosphate would have three, but basically what you're doing is you're moving around a phosphate group, or kind of if you look at this picture, this little dot, this is a phosphate group. Basically this is how enzymes or different components are turned on or off, okay, is by this phosphate group going on or off, okay? So you see kind of the ligand binds, so this would be your cell binds, affects another cell, and then CAMP, or cyclic AMP, then activates another cell, okay? Adds a phosphate group, and then this causes a cellular response because this enzyme, which was once inactive, it is now active, and it is going to have an effect on the cell. And sometimes there's many different enzymes in this cascade. Like there will be one enzyme, another enzyme, another enzyme. It's kind of a complex map. So cyclic AMP activates other proteins via phosphorylation, so moving this phosphate group around, causing changes in their shape. So if you look at this shape of this protein, right, it has changed shape, okay? So there's many different, it's kind of like a handoff on a baton, right? You track kids who are gone, right? You're handing off this phosphate group to this guy, to this guy, right? To have that response, okay? Let's just compare and contrast them. If you look at steroid hormones, affects the DNA. It affects the DNA itself, whereas non-steroidal hormones do not actually enter the nucleus. They don't affect the actual DNA or transcription. They just, enzymes that were already there get turned on or off. But both result in altered cell function, okay? Turning something on. Like, for example, non-steroidal hormone would be human growth hormone, okay? This would cause your cells to maybe go through, like if this was human growth hormone, this would cause your cells to undergo mitosis and to cause you to grow, right? Mitosis is when you replicate cells, when you grow more. Like when you grow, you are a lot of the times, you're creating more cells. You're doing a lot of cell division, right? So if you had growth hormone, this would be inducing the cell possibly to undergo mitosis and cell division, okay? This is, you don't have to know this, but this is a hormone cascade. So this is a sequence of reactions where this one hormone, like cholesterol, is turned into progesterone and prosterone and all these different things, all right, and it's converted by these different enzymes. So all these arrows are different enzymes that are converting to these different chemical groups, and by the initial stimulus, so the initial hormone causes this chain of dominoes, all right? You guys know what dominoes are, right? One domino, flick it, and then it knocks over a huge chain. It activates a huge chemical reaction. And a lot of the times, hormones are multiplied. So just a little bit of one hormone will cause the effect or the release of tons more of another hormone in the cascade, okay? So it's like dominoes, okay? That's what it is. And if you look at, like here, maybe we can go on Google and look at some of these pictures, but there's just many different intermediates. And a lot of the times, like sometimes I've had to memorize these at times in my educational career, but a lot of the times you just have to be able to interpret it, and it just makes more sense to look at a picture. So here, let's look at hormone cascade. Let's see. No, the immune system's pretty cool. All right. Yeah, so look at there. There's progesterone. This is it's not even a hormone really, but this causes an effect here. It binds here. This causes an effect on this, which creates DAG, which PLC gamma or whatever, which causes PKC to go. This inhibits CAMP, cyclic AMP, so the actually CAMP would go down. CAMP, you're actually going to see it a lot, cyclic AMP. If you're going to science, you'll see your boy CAMP quite a bit. Progesterone also affects NPR, which activates the inactive form of it, and this can actually go into the nucleus. So this one actually has effects on both the DNA as well as the surface of the cells. So yeah, isn't this fun? So yeah, you don't have to know this, but this is just an example of a hormone cascade. Okay, I hope you guys learned something. This would not be a bad video to go back and rewatch when we get ready for our test. Okay, so anyway, Tracksters, hope you had a good day, and see ya.